to the show. Let's get our little intro. And tartucanwordpress.com, which is linked to, as always, on the website. Welcome to Evolution Hour on our little bit in May here. It was hot today in Spokane. Our temperatures went woo from like 55 up to 80 in the course of a day or two. And that's perfectly fine with me. So I get the short sleeve bit on here. Our show, of course. Hello. Hi, Psy. Yes. We are continuing with our cute and wonderful analysis of Titans, the creationist piece of crap that Sarfati and Tay have come up with, analyzing just exactly where they are at the scholarly level, since the little bastards didn't supply a bibliography, so you would have no way of knowing immediately what sources were in there. And our part two, this is the first of the threatened bi-weekly analyses of Casey Luskin and Richard Sternberg and all the rest in their list of 800 plus papers showing that junk DNA is mainly functional, which Luskin waved at is in the debate with Dan Stern-Cardinelli a ways back. So as promised, we are actually going to be launching into that, and I think it's going to be quite delightful. So the next critter on the list of Sarfati and Tay are the Tyrannosaurs, and they're kind of okay with it being the family of Tyrannosaurids, but maybe a super family of Tyrannosaurids, which is a backhanded way of acknowledging that maybe it might be difficult to draw the line between Tyrannosaurids and their immediate cousins. Of course, they don't go into any detail. They cited in this particular installment, they're kind of sparse on their technical citations. It's basically on the list of whether or not it's carnivorous and how big they were and what their lifestyles were, which is just perfectly fine paleontology. But shouldn't we be connecting this with creationism? There's a 2004 paper from Erickson, which is quite a ways old, that I'll be putting a link up to on the giganticism issue. And they slip in an old post from 2000 from Sarfati on a kind of side issue. It sounds like they're talking about only the Sue's, this Tyrannosaurus Sue fossils, maladies, diseases, and all that, which again would be a problem for the whole notion of pre-flood carnivory and pre-flood strife that supposedly was only going to occur after the flood. But of course, Creation Ministries International has functionally moved the goalposts down to sin with Adam causing death and decline, but an awful lot of then death was and carnivory and all sorts of terrible stuff was happening in the pre-flood world. They pretty well thrown in the towel on that one. But Sarfati's post that's being linked to here is actually not much about that. It's about a litany of reasons why birds and dinosaurs aren't connected, which, of course, doing that in 2000, there's an awful lot of work that's happened in the 20 years since, and it's revealing that he should be trotting out such an old bit. I'm assuming that some of that's going to be reprised in the bird dinosaur chapters later on in the book. We'll find out. Don't hold breath. But anyway, we'll see. What struck me is how something that's missing from Sarfati and Tay's analysis here, which is creationism. So Tyrannosaurus systematics, how many Barrowmans are there? Based on what? It's revealing that the Matthew McLean 2012 piece, unfortunately, there's only an abstract available, so I'm not going to be putting a link into it. And then Aaron's 2014 thing on the Tyrannosaurids and as a hollow Barrowman. That one I will be putting a link to from Answers in Genesis magazine, Journal of Creation. Why wouldn't they cite that? I mean, are they that persnickety about not giving a bit for the competition within their own creationist community? Or are they tacitly aware of the fact that maybe they don't want to allude to it because it's not really helping the case. We don't know. The other matter would be taphonomy, which is, in principle, every single tyrannosaur, and for that matter, every single dinosaur and blah, 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 every single fossil, needs to be accounted for within that big slosh flood geology. And I think they would be hard-pressed to offer any detailed analysis to show that Sue, the T-Rex, or any of the other specimens that are known inevitably came from a cataclysmic environmental thing. And they don't even try to deal with it, and I haven't seen creationists do. I'm sure if they were diligent enough, I mean, Woodmarapp and others, they're perfectly capable. Michael Ord is perfectly capable of just blither-blathering on this matter to whatever extent. But Sarfatti and Trey don't even try. You know, what can we do on that? But with the next, probably the next couple of weeks, then we'll be splogging through the remaining of the Tyrannosaur things, which is a smitter spattering, relatively few that are recent papers, which always intrigues me as to why they're drawing on older work rather than newer work. And we're going to find out whether or not any of them are sliding into zones that are indicating that they're misrepresenting. The Erickson paper in my spreadsheet where I break down the whole listings of things, I'm listing that in as a not misrepresented piece. They do not make claims about it that are not in the piece. They don't really discuss much of it in detail. And it's not really about the taphonomy or the systematics. And so, and that technical issue, did Tyrannosaurs get to be really big and why? It's a wash one way or the other. So it's not one that they've misrepresented. Not that that's helping them much, because they're still way over 50% of their technical citations that they have dealt with are being misrepresented, as we have been detailing in previous weeks. And then on the matter of the creationism angle and how much of it's incestuous, that addition of that new Sarfatti piece means that most of their source citations in the book so far are just from their fellow creationists and often themselves. So it's very limited imagination going on in there. Let us move over to the intelligent design side, though. I'll be putting links up to Luskin's posts and the various papers and that be popping up in this area. I think I put in a link. If I haven't, you can find it online, Dan Stern-Cardinale and his debate. If you need to have a link to it at some point, I can always stick it in subsequent episodes. But it was a funky one, because clearly Luskin is very proud of this 800 plus papers. And 800 citations, that's more typically than you find in a Steve Meyer book, which looks to be about that number or maybe less, down to 500. I haven't done a full source analysis of either one of his books to be sure about that. And it's way more than the total number of citations that we found in Roop and Sanford or Jensen and that, which are you're running only in the couple hundred level. So 800 is a lot. But is it what they need to have? And I want to give the background context to where Luskin is coming in, because there's some relevant information of what he's dumping in before we actually get down to the rubber meets the road aspect of this. The 2024 post on creation myths, misquotes, and misrepresents junk DNA video, that was the opening salvo that Luskin put up. And what intrigues me, and having met Luskin once in a lecture that he gave, oh my gosh, maybe 11, 12 years ago. He's very amiable and pleasant, but boy, he tends to leave stuff out. And if you start pressing him on little fiddly bit details, there's way much less there than meets the eye. But Luskin certainly tends to leave out contrary stuff. And so in bringing up the issue of junk DNA and the ENCODE project, which is basically the line in the sand, for those of you unaware with the ENCODE project, and I will type that into our little thing for those of you who want to check up on that, capital letters, boop. It was an attempt to work out, to detect what cellular activity was being done from all the different RNA and DNA in our biology. And that's where they were coming up with initially the idea that about 80% of stuff is actually that's being transcribed is appearing to have some sort of biologic activity. Well, Dan Stern, Cardinale, and others have pointed out that was a bit of an overstatement on their part. And there was a significant criticism of it by Grauer, which incidentally Luskin's retreading of this case simply bypasses. It doesn't cite it at all. But more interestingly is the 2014 Kellis paper, which Dan Stern Cardinale is arguing is walking back that 80% number. And Luskin is drawing the line in the sand saying, oh, no, they aren't. And he makes just a big deal out of this idea. Well, I'll be putting the link up to the Kellis paper so you can look to yourself. And there's also some other stuff that Luskin fiddled with. There was a back and forth on the issue by Brunet and Doolittle, such as regarding the C-value issue. The authors do not rise to the challenge of predicting how many functional elements such bloated genomes might boast. Ouch. This level of criticism that was brought out, Luskin is just flushing that down the toilet. He's not discussing any of it. He's simply authority quoting his way through the delicate little material and the text strings that he brings up as Duane Gish would have done. That's why I like to think of Luskin as the Duane Gish of intelligent design. The quotes are all technically there, but the context is what's being left out. And you can contrast Brunet and Doolittle's piece with the really surprisingly short reply by Kellis in PNAS that effectively said, thank you very much for these observations. We view our ENCODE as kind of a springboard for future research, which is perfectly fine. I mean, it's not a useless tool. The question is, was the presumption that what they were finding with activity translated into stuff that was actually doing something in biologically meaningful ways, rather than just something that's being reacted to some extent, but not necessarily doing much. And that is the fundamental issue. And I imagine if Dan can get a chat with Luskin, I know that, again, that Dan really wanted to be discussing that Kellis paper in detail, and they didn't have time for it in the course of their little debate. Anyhow, you will notice in the initial 2024 Luskin piece that he's just retreading an awful lot of authority quotes. And the fact that so many of them were in sources that were already in my data field, my TIP research field, meant that this is stuff that they've been just recycling. It's not new material at all. So there's a very long name, Stomatoyiannopoulos, 2012, that I'll be putting a link up on. And then there is a commentary piece by Matic and Dinger from 2013 that I'll be putting up a thing on. Both, by the way, 2012 and 2013 are in the early stages of ENCODE. So wouldn't you know where their position is in 2024 rather than 2012 or 2013? And that's where things start getting a little funky. So right off the bat, regarding their giant 800 list of papers, which I'll be putting a link up to that so everybody can find that. Their thing, here's a far from exhaustive yet still exhausting list of papers discovering function for junk DNA. Well, buckaroos, I am not exhausted by source analysis. So this is just like, ooh, bring it on, bring it on. What immediately I struck, and by the way, when I'm doing this thing, I put the text of the piece into a word processor file. And so I can do text searching on it. So that's why I was able to find out, well, okay, Kellis, has he got any more Kellis papers in that 800 list? Only one. And that is a little piece that turns out to be a commentary piece by Alexander Gates, and Kellis was one of the co-authors, A Wealth of Discovery Built on the Human Genome Project by the Numbers. And I'll be putting a link up to that little puppy. That is immediately bumping into the way I'm analyzing my spreadsheet for this list, which is, do the papers go beyond simply saying that there is some functionality to junk DNA? but rather are they contending that most, or at least 50%, which is the number Luskin finally had dragged out of him by Dan towards the tail end of the debate, at that level? If they don't, then Luskin is misrepresenting the source material. The other sidebar is how much of this is bumping into the theodicy issue, which is a set of the junk DNA that's doing something to cause disease, not something that gets mutated and causes a disease, but the thing being of itself that it's activated, boop, and it's causing a disease problem, not something that is already operating in a benign way that does that. Anything that pops into that category is in the theodicy issue of if this is designed, it's not nice design, is it? So it turns out that this little commentary piece had quite a bit issues about the discussion of disease elements and why this is so important to look into to try to figure out how cancers are working and all that sort of thing. So we're stumbling right into this area. The closest that this commentary piece gets to the point of issue which it would need to be in order for Luskin to be able to use it as a positive value is a sentence that the majority of functional sequences in the human genome do not encode proteins. We already knew that. Was Luskin misreading this to think that they were claiming that the majority of the genome were such sequences that are functional? They don't explicitly state that in this little post from 2021. Oh, by the way, in the 800 list, they misdate it to 2022. And minor little glitch. They give it correctly in the earlier post, but somehow somebody typoed, which is another issue of how this list is compiled. Apparently, the three authors of it went through and glommed onto blocks of stuff, and then they dumped it into a main file, and bingo, the way they go, which is why, although they're organized by category, they're not anything like alphabetical order or chronological order. So it's like they just kind of dumped it on it, which is a tendency in the intelligent design movement, who like to intelligently design things to be as difficult as possible for anybody to track anything down. Their list of 1,100 scientists doubting Darwinian naturalism, none of that's in alphabetical order. And so because it's in a PDF format, it's just not at all easy. In a future book project, I think I have a little sidebar of analyzing that and eventually constructing a coordinated listing that puts everybody in alphabetical order and breaks everything down as to how many of them are intelligent designers and how many of them are people that shouldn't be on there at all because they recanted the position or were sorry that they signed it, and how many of them are young earth creationists and what disciplines they are, how many of them are even remotely relevant to evolutionary issues. There's a lot of stuff to analyze on that. I hope to get to it someday. But at the moment, we're slogging along on this. Now, I had not one but two things in my reference bibliography from that Kellis was co-authoring on these matters of ENCODE papers, both from 2020. And I'll be putting links up to those because they're open access. Oddly enough, they're not on the 800 list. You would think if the subsequent work they're doing was so powerfully supporting for this functional DNA thing, that would be on the list. But nope, neither one of them are. So we now have to wonder why that's the case. Now, I'll give you a little bit of a presage. Let me look through a few of these the extent of functionality in the human genome. Each one of these papers and what is our genome encode and all that, I really do recommend that you go through ahead because they're perfectly fine and fascinating works. But they're not really helping their argument much. If we get to the area for the next papers, which I'll be discussing next week, I'll give you a little hint on that one. The next two papers that I did look at, neither one of them are supporting the position any more than this Gates piece is. So we're batting 1,000 so far out of 3. Now we're going to find out in due course whether or not their number actually goes up, but it doesn't look terribly promising. One of the things that is immediately exercising my curiosity is the fact that the big block of the papers are relating to ALU retrotransposons. Now, for many, many years, I have been paying close attention to ALU retrotransposons. And if you are aware of my evil things on Twitter, you will know that next to the reptile-mammal transition, ALUs are the thing I love to bring up to anti-evolutionists, because I'd love to know whether they think any of them are designed to be there. And if they're young Earth creationist, Adam and Eve sorts, well, how many ALUs did Adam and Eve have? Can you tell me? This is not a thing that any of the anti-evolutionists are thinking through. So ALUs, when I first started analyzing them, and this was in the late 1990s, they had found about 400,000 of them in our genome. And now currently there appear to be anywhere from 1.2 to 1.4 million of them that have been identified. And they are apparently growing periodically because the little teeny snippets, which I think are like 30 nucleotides long, something like that, or maybe it's 300. I'd have to look up the number on it. But anyway, they basically have a copy me aspect, but not a read me. So they can insert themselves and be copied and proliferate all over the place because they're not doing anything. The mechanism is just passing right over them. But a mutation can relatively easily occur in the opening segment of this, which translates into a readme signal. Pay attention to me. And that's where things get mucky, because in the vast majority of cases that I've seen, and I suspect we're going to find out yet again in the vast majority of the cases that Luskin and company are trying to wave in front of us, that these are things that are causing problems in the genome. You do have a small proportion that actually end up accidentally being functional. And I was aware, indeed, there's a bunch of ALUs that play a part in our brain chemistry that if they, by chance, are okay and they're doing something useful as a spandrel, fine and dandy. But the vast majority of them, if they pop up, particularly in protein coding genes, suddenly you've got the protein misfolding because it's got a chunk of DNA from these stupid retrotransposons stuck in there and changing the physical conformation of the molecule, and that tends to cause problems. So there's a lot of diseases that get associated with them. So from my point of view, I'm looking at this, Casey, do you really want to bring up ALU retrotransposons? Oh gosh, this is not a good idea. So we're going to be plowing through them one by one by one. And because so much of this stuff is biological, odds are virtually all of it's going to be open access that we'll be able to put links up to. So we'll be finding that out week on week on week. Now, I will not bore you to tears by trying to do this every single week. So what I've been planning to do is then alternating every other week. And then my part 2s on those other weeks will be to these little fascinating little sidebars that pop up in creationism that I collect, some of which is going to be ending up in the new Rocks for Their Volume 2. To continue to follow through on that. So anyway, that brings us up to speed on that. So what we can see so far from the listing is that it doesn't look good for Luskin's position on this. What's going to be fascinating to see in individual papers will be what form of retrotransposons are they talking about? How big of a subset are there? Because, you know, ALUs on their own are like 10%. But if you're not talking about even 50% of that bunch, if you're talking about a subset of ALUs, as one of the papers that's going to be up, I think, next week, 2 weeks from now, is indicating, that in no way, shape, or form can you inflate that up to that 50% level, which is the point Dan was trying to make. And indeed, Luskin functionally admitted that no, he doesn't have the evidence that 50% is actually functional, but that's the hope that they have. Now, that puts Luskin below the level that Fazal Rana had when he was similarly having discussions, I think, with Dan Stern Cardinale, just some 6 months or so prior to that time, where Rana went with a much higher, almost all functional. And so, and was more honest, frankly, than Wickel-Waffle Luskin was, by arguing that if it turns out that that high number isn't real, that's actually a problem for the design argument. And therefore, that's underlying why this is such a big deal issue for anti-evolutionists, whether they're in the Fazal Rana reason to believe camp, old Earth creationism, or the squishy creationism light of intelligent design. And functionally, this carries over intrinsically to young Earth creationism too, but they're often not as focal point about it. Because they, if anything, they discuss ALUs even less than Jonathan Wells did, which was practically nothing. We alluded to that, I think, in Rocks. It really rankles on their idea of design to think that the vast majority of our genome isn't doing anything. It's the equivalent of putting a gas tank on a Tesla. It's a thing of having a feature that, why is it there? What's it going on? They really do want the lean, mean, beautifully designed, exquisitely calibrated thing where it's all testifying to the designer's brilliance, and there's no superfluous fluff going on. Even if they don't conceptualize it and say so openly, that's really what's going on inside of their heads on that. And that's why the need to see so much of the DNA as being functional is a really big thing. I think the average evolutionist is going to just let the chips fall where they may on it. You know, if it turns out that most of the junk is actually functional, well, la-dee-da, isn't that interesting? And let's proceed and understand it. But as Dan and Zach Hancock and others have pointed out, and this is their field, no, it's not that way. And that's why ENCODE got such pushback from an awful lot of people, including Grauer. And although the ENCODE project is a perfectly fine technique for isolating little snippets of things that get localized, the issue, therefore, is moved to a different category, which is when the cell goes about doing its shtick, does it know what to use? And there's a massive systems that edit out introns and all this kind of stuff in this seething mess that ends up generating pieces of things and regulatory molecules and stuff that binds to this and that and that thing, all of which is at blinding speed, by the way. It's, you know, when I've seen any modeling of the pacings at which things do, in the same way that the pacing mechanism for how RNA or DNA is duplicated in a cell is just done really fast. And so it's a very mecky thing. What it's looking like in a lot of cases is that the cell doesn't know diddly squat about what to use in a particular instance. So it basically transcribes and puts everything into the mix. As I described it to some guests that were over, imagine if you have a chef who wants to make a cake, and that's the actual cellular thing that particular cell is supposed to be doing at that particular moment in the biological process. But the management system doesn't know that. All it knows is you need your tools to work with. So it puts out every single ingredient in the kitchen, and it puts out all the pots and pans and stirrers and everything you could possibly use. And then the chef comes in and picks the pieces that make sense and that connect up and cause some little sensor to notice, aha, that's what we need. And then the rest is sitting there, and the junk crew comes in afterwards and cleans everything away and recycles all the amino acids. That's what it's kind of look like it's going on. And remember, this is not a laborious process. It's the overhead of cellular operation that's going on inside of the cell. If somebody, Dan or others, see that as an inaccurate announcement, let me know and clarify it. So the tendency in the encode camp is to want to see not really an awful lot of doing stuff and then throwing it away and recycling it. They really want to see that as an indication that all of that stuff is actually useful. But it's case by case by case by case by case. That's apparently not being shown up. And if you read between the lines of Kellis and the little wiggle word phrasing, how they do, where they say this is an important, the encode process is an important step in furthering the conversation. This is all a reflection of the fact that they can't say, well, we have established, boom, 80% functionality. Notice that 80% is not 100%, even with the encode argument before they started doing these little walkbacks. So I do hope that Dan and Casey have a round 2 where they can go into that Kellis paper. And then I was hoping that Dan and company would probably want to look into those more recent Kellis papers to see how that fits into the scheme. It's all perfectly valid and wonderful science. But is it supporting the position that Casey Luskin wants over in the intelligent design camp? That's the point at issue. So source by source, boring as hell. We're going to plow through all 800 plus of them to see exactly where they do. And because most of them should be open access, you're going to be able to follow along. You won't have to take my word for it. And I'll be, if any of them are indicating that their work is indicating that the majority of the genome is doing something, or even the vast majority of the little components that they're talking about are doing something, then that's an interesting kettle of fish. We'll find out whether that's the case. I know already from some of the paper titles that some of this stuff is, hello, Vesta, that some of this stuff is directly related to cancer research and disease issues. So we're going to be going through that with a little fine-tooth comb, and I'm going to be suspecting that when push comes to shove, a high percentage, and maybe 50%, to use Luskin's number, and maybe way more than that, are going to be ticking off that theodicy column. I don't have to have a column for authority quoting because it's an unannotated list. It's just a pile of source citations. And then the other issue, of course, is that I'm constructing and putting everything back into alphabetical order so that you can see what the hell the whole master paper thing is. So you can find out then what the papers are and see whether or not a particular paper is on it in a way that's a little bit more clear. And also, as I'm looking into it, I suspect a big chunk of that stuff is not in my reference bibliography. And if so, then that's going to be an interesting issue about what lists are they drawing off of when they compiled this monstrosity. Are they riffing off of unpublished work or stuff that I wasn't aware of or not? Because if it's newer material that I don't have in my reference thing, and I especially don't have an indication that it was cited by any anti-evolutionist, then they're doing some new investigating. But is it traipsing around like David Capege is to find out, last weekend Rocky Mountain Atheists held their second week in recent. Oh, yes, I would love to speak at one of those conventions. If anybody out there saying, if you can give me the stipend to transport me there, or I think now with the airplane flights, you need a bloody passport, which I don't have. So the other route is I could drive. I have a hybrid car, so I can go quite a long ways on things. And better yet, even if I can get a little bit of a fee for doing that sort of thing, I would like to have a lecture tour thing like Richard Dawkins or anybody else. I'm open for that. I certainly can arrange time to skip around. I think that I will toot my own horn. I think I'm a damn good lecturer. And I can analyze and compress material quite tightly. I have actually been paid for lecturing. I did, as I alluded to in a previous episode, way back, that I was invited to talk about separation of church and state issues on this international seminar that a conservative law college over in Seattle was organizing, and I was the lecturer on the first one, and it went over so well, she had me back for the second one. So, and I was actually paid that. So that was all in Spokane. But anyway, I'm available for that. I'll tell you the approach right off the bat. There's an awful lot of topics I can discuss. I would need to know what the time frame is for the presentation. I prefer to give really tight, compressed 20-minute, half-hour things, and then a lot of Q&A. I'm exactly the opposite of PC Myers or Dawkins or others that will often have hour and a half long perorations, and they're fascinating things. And then there's this little itty bitty little snippet of 20-minute, half-hour questions, and then whoop, the guy is spirited away back to the hotel room. Well, no, I love the Q&A. And that's where the rubber hits the road. And it also allows you to explore topics that are, as the audience is picking up and developing and putting in their own input, that's way beyond what the actual speech was going to be about. And you only find out about that when you do a proper investigative Q&A. And preferably if I have a wireless microphone, that's even better, because I can get right down and dirty into the audience, not sitting up on a stage like the Oracle on Olympus. So anyway, I'm open for that. I would certainly love to be able to do that lecturing thing. And as anybody that knows me knows, I don't tire out easily. It's a fun little operation to go on. So anyway, that's my little shameless plug for the lecture circuit. I can easily travel anywhere, in a day or two by my car, yippee skippy. So otherwise, it might be a little bit more complicated if I have to do flying, where I think you have to have a bloody passport. And I've been pushing that on the back burner of expenses to deal with. I got all the paperwork and stuff prepared for it, and I would have to get a picture from AAA, or I think they'll do that at the post office and that too. And then it takes weeks or so to get through the thing. But anyway, I would have to have that, so I were going to be flying. Not that I'm anxious. Flying today has all of the romance of bus travel with more security. So it's a dreary operation that's going on. I would have loved to have been able to fly more back in the ancient times of the 1960s and 70s, when flying by first class, if you could afford it, was actually delightful. But anyway, I guess first class is still kind of delightful if you traveled in that thing, or the private plane set, which I am not anywhere near. Anyway, that gives an idea on things. And little sidebars that keep coming up. The research. There's a future book down the road on the origin and evolution of religion and the various matters there. And so that's topics that I continually keep track of. And that one may very well be a 3-volume work. I think that's entirely possible. And we want to be comprehensive. Jackson Wheat and I on that. Although I think Jackson wants to do a work on the conspiracy thinking stuff. And so anti-vaxxers, flat earth, and stuff, and then the political extremism and all of that, Christian nationalism, that will bump into sidebars of the religion issue, but it's not per se about the religion issue. But that's looking like that's going to be the book after we get volume 2 of Rocks out of the way. So anyway, we are a little past half hour. Do we have any questions from the chat from Vesta or our little insect buzz? If not, we'll see. Let me put up my patrons. I think I got my little thing up on that front. And I got to see whether or not there's suddenly a new menu that's popped up from... Hemet Maida. Yeah, I'd like to bump into him. Cara Santamara. Eugenia Scott. Eugenie Scott had to cancel. That's too bad. that I met her many years ago, I think around 2013-ish period. But needless to say, I think I could deliver a detailed issue-oriented bit about the role of creationism in society on a par with what Eugenie Scott would do. And so there's something else as to I have a lot of potentialities as to what I could be talking about. Let me get back to the exciting world of putting up my screen window here. Boop. And let me share. And there we go, our colleagues and researchers and assistant researchers and friends and legacy patrons who have helped over the time. It makes a big difference every month to get that support. I'm most grateful. And I will be keeping at it as long as I can because I love doing the work. And let me also find out whether or not yeah, there's that stupid little the new sidebar that you can see on the right side of the screen is a little menu that allows it's popped up, I guess, in the latest update on my laptop that indicates that I can kind of actually do editing and things for free with a word processor thing on my laptop, which but only on that particular computer. And I'm doing all my main writing on my PC, so I don't have to worry about it. So we're terribly sorry if that puts up an advertisement angle that I would like to not have, because this is a ad-free program. It always intrigues me when I'm watching Pelagia or various other people, Dapper Dino, and then suddenly along comes the ad from the little shill guy for William Lane Craig. They apparently got a lot of scratch around because I see them popping up all over the place. And I'm going, yep, nope. Well, I'm at way below monetized level. And even without monetized level, I would have not any desire to have any adverts at all, let alone ones that do not agree philosophically with the universe as it actually is. So there we go. Now, let me put up my advert for the book. And we will pump it up, boom, 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 boom. Come on. There we go. Alrighty, and then we share our screen. The old person attempting to learn the new tricks. There we go, and we will let that run. And remember that the links to all the books and the Patreon site and the website, that tortuganwordpress.com. Oh, when do I think book 2 will be out? Well, I would be surprised if it could be out by the end of the year. I'm inclined to think, especially with the collegiate activity, that Jackson, who's now got his degree and he's moving on, he's doing teaching assistant and all that, so he's got like a real job. 2025 seems probable on that one. Needless to say, we are adding in every new little wrinkle of technical stuff that pops along in the meantime, so that just as the first book was right up to date 2020 on the publication date, the new book will be right up to date for all of that stuff in there. So we will be plowing along, and if you liked volume 1, I think you're going to love volume 2, because it's got some delightful scoops, and there we're diving knee deep into so many new topics that Yeah. That's going to be neat, including whale evolution and all that stuff, and origin of tetrapods. There's a lot of stuff going on there. So anyway, I'm getting almost down to the end of my power on here on the thing. Everybody, stay safe if you are in spots with terrible weather and guck and glung, and or people dropping bombs on you. And because I've got some friends that are in Ukraine, and so I haven't heard from them in a while, and I hope they're still doing well. And so everybody stay safe, and we will see you next week.